Why prehistoric babies were left to die. Imagine giving birth in a cave, surrounded not by doctors or midwives, but by firelight and fear. The tribe looks at your newborn, and then turns away. A silent decision is made. That baby will not survive. The night, why? Was it weakness? A bad omen? Or something far more complex? Welcome to the brutal world of prehistory, where survival wasn't just about strength, it was about sacrifice. Chapter 1. Born into Brutality. Part 1. The first breath meant a fight for life. Close your eyes and picture this. A woman screams in the pitch-black recesses of a cave. Her face is drenched in sweat, lit only by flickering torchlight. Her knees are pressed against dirt and rock. There is no bed, no sterile tools, no soft voices guiding her through the pain. Just the distant howl of predators and the tightening grip of another contraction. This is childbirth. 40,000 years ago. Back then, giving birth wasn't a myth, was a gamble, one in which both mother and baby might not survive. Anthropologists believe that prehistoric births were almost always done squatting, kneeling, or even standing, guided only by instinct or the help of another experienced woman. In the group, there were no midwives as we know them, no painkillers, and absolutely no room for complications. A breech birth, a tangled umbilical cord that often meant death, even if the baby was born alive. That first breath didn't guarantee a life. In fact, for many infants, it was only the beginning of an invisible test. Will this child make it? Should this child make it? The average life expectancy in the Upper Paleolithic era hovered around 30 to 35 years. But for infants, it was far worse. Experts estimate that nearly 1 in 2 children died before reaching age 5. Many in their first days of life. Prehistoric parents weren't cruel, they were survivors. They had to make impossible choices based on brutal math. If this child is weak, sickly, deformed, or born during famine, the chances of survival drop. Not just for the baby, but for the whole group. So, in many tribes, the moment of birth wasn't a celebration. It was a cold assessment. Does this child look strong? Is it breathing well? Are its limbs straight? Because if not, the silence that followed the crying wasn't grief. It was acceptance. Part 2. Why birth was a death sentence for some, for most. Of human history, survival wasn't a right, it was a privilege earned by strength, health, and timing. And when it came to babies, especially newborns, every second was a test of resilience. The moment a child was born, the clock started ticking. Hypothermia was an immediate danger. Without warm furs or controlled environments, even a slight drop in temperature could turn fatal. A weak cry, cold skin, a refusal to suckle. These were seen not just as warning signs, but as omens. And so, decisions had to be made fast. We imagine today that every mother would fight for her child's life, no matter what. But in the prehistoric world, the mother didn't always have the final say. The tribe did. The elders, the hunters, and the seasoned mothers, those who had seen death and famine firsthand, would gather, sometimes wordlessly, to decide if this new life was worth the risk. Food was scarce. The tribe couldn't afford to carry a child that wouldn't grow strong. Every extra mouth needed to justify itself. If an infant showed signs of illness, deformity, or frailty, it wasn't always viewed as a life, was seen as a liability. Sometimes, it was the weather. A harsh winter meant low food reserves, thin shelters, and dangerous travel. If a baby was born during this time, its chances dropped dramatically. If it couldn't be fed or kept warm, the decision was made to spare it a slow, painful death by ending its life quickly. And yes, there were methods. Silent ones. Exposure was the most common. A baby would simply be left outside the camp or cave, exposed to the elements, predators, and the dark. Sometimes it was swaddled in furs, sometimes not. It was rarely spoken about afterward. This wasn't murder in the eyes of the tribe. It was necessity, a choice made not from hatred, but from harsh wisdom, the kind that had kept humans alive long enough to evolve. Part 3. The evolutionary gamble behind every birth. Every time a baby was born in the prehistoric world, it was an evolutionary gamble. Nature had one rule: the strongest survive, the weak fall away. But unlike animals that rely purely on instinct, early humans were different. They had memory, community, emotion, and still they had to play by nature's brutal rules. It's important to understand that these decisions weren't always made coldly. Some families fought desperately to keep their newborns alive, crafting crude baby carriers from hide and fur, huddling close to preserve warmth, chewing food to feed toothless infants. But even the most loving efforts often failed against disease, hunger, or environment. Love alone couldn't keep a baby alive when the world outside was unforgiving. And yet, this pain served a purpose in our evolution. The emotional devastation of losing a child made future decisions sharper. Tribes learned to recognize the signs. Earlier, mothers who had lost one child became experts at keeping the next alive. Slowly, knowledge passed through generations, not in words, but in gestures, actions, and quiet wisdom. How to hold a newborn, how to swaddle it, how to keep it from crying at night when predators roamed near. These early lessons shaped us. They laid the foundations for parenting, for empathy, and for the incredible protective instincts humans carry today. But not every decision was guided by love. Sometimes it was survival. A baby born with a cleft palate, missing limbs, or even just too small, that child, in many communities, wouldn't be raised. Not because people were heartless, but because they understood the cost. Keeping one weak child alive could doom the rest. And so, every prehistoric birth came with a silent calculation. Can we carry this child? Can we feed it through the winter? Will it slow us down during migration? If the answer was no, the baby would quietly vanish from history. This is the reality that shaped our ancestors. A world where the miracle of life was never guaranteed, and the value of a newborn was measured against the weight of survival. Chapter 2. The tribe decides. 1. Survival wasn't just a family matter in modern times. The birth of a baby is a private, intimate moment. Parents decide how to raise their child, what name to give, what values to instill. But in the prehistoric world, that decision didn't belong to the parents alone. It belonged to the tribe. Hunter-gatherer societies were communal by design. Everyone depended on everyone else to survive. The hunters needed gatherers. The mothers needed firekeepers, and the elderly needed protection. So when a new life entered the group, it wasn't seen as a personal joy. It was a shared responsibility, a shared risk. The tribe didn't just help raise the child. In some cases, they decided if the child should be raised at all. Imagine this scene. A baby is born under the cover of night. The mother is exhausted, the father unsure. The elders are called. They examine the child not with cruelty, but with experience. They've seen what happens when the group stretches itself too thin. They've buried children before. They know the signs. Too small, not breathing well, limp limbs, a skin tone they don't recognize. They exchange glances. No words are needed. The message is clear. This baby won't make it, and worse. Trying to keep it alive might take others down to dot. It's hard to imagine now. But this communal decision-making was a form of early social strategy. Tribes that made hard choices often had higher survival rates. Those who tried to save every child, no matter the cost, were more likely to perish. And there's another layer: hierarchy. Not all babies were treated equally. The offspring of a respected hunter, a strong warrior, or a gifted healer might be given more leeway. A sick child from a weaker couple, more likely to be abandoned. This wasn't fairness. This was survival math. In prehistoric times, your life before you even had a name depended on what you offered the tribe, or what the tribe feared you'd take away. Part 2. The invisible rules of life and death. There were no written laws in the prehistoric world, but make no mistake, there were rules. Unspoken, unwritten, but deeply understood. Every tribe had its own invisible code, shaped by generations of trial and error. And when it came to newborns, the stakes were too high to leave things to emotion. If the tribe decided a baby should live, that child would be accepted as one of their own, fed, carried, protected, taught. But if the elders judged otherwise, no one resisted. Not openly, because to challenge the group's decision meant risking the unity that kept them all alive. These were not heartless people. In fact, that's what made these decisions so painful: the knowledge that a life might have been possible if only the rains came sooner, if only the hunt had gone better, if only the baby had cried louder. But if only couldn't feed the tribe, emotion couldn't outweigh necessity. There were also signs the tribe paid attention to. Signs they believed came from the spirits or from nature itself. A baby born during an eclipse. A bad omen. A baby that didn't cry for hours. A sign from the gods. These beliefs, however mystical, helped guide practical choices. They gave people a story, a reason to justify the impossible. Some tribes believed in reincarnation. If a baby died, it would come back stronger in another life. This made the act of letting go just slightly more bearable. Others believed the spirits chose which children were meant to survive. So rather than blame themselves, the tribe would accept fate and move on. In this way, the tribe maintained its strength not just physically, but psychologically. Grief had no time to fester. Regret could not linger. They couldn't afford it, so the next time the group moved on, the mother might carry no child in her arms, but she'd carry the memory. And the tribe, in silent solidarity, would carry her pain unspoken, but understood. That was how they lived. That was how they kept going. Part 3. The cost of collective survival in the prehistoric world. No one lived for themselves alone. Every breath, every step, every decision was tied to the group. A single weak link, especially a helpless infant, tipped the scales toward catastrophe. So when the tribe decided to abandon a baby, it wasn't cruelty, it was an act of collective preservation. These choices weren't just about physical strength. They were about timing. Was the tribe about to migrate? Was food running low? Had there been a recent predator attack? Even if a baby was healthy, being born at the wrong time could seal its fate. This is the harsh reality. Sometimes a strong baby died, so the tribe could live. The emotional cost of such decisions is hard to measure. We'll never fully know what prehistoric parents felt, but the bones they left behind tell us plenty. Some infant remains were buried with wrapped in furs, placed near the mother. Others were found alone, far from camp, unmarked and exposed. These silent graves hint at the emotional contradictions of prehistoric life: love, loss, and survival in constant collision. Interestingly, there were occasional exceptions. If a tribe was thriving, food was plentiful, shelter secure, might take a chance on a weaker child. In these rare cases, compassion outweighed caution. The child would be nurtured, carried, and watched over. Some of those children survived and passed on their genes, helping evolve our capacity for empathy. But those were rare moments. Most decisions were made with hard eyes and harder hearts, and once the choice was made, there was no turning back. The tribe didn't look over its shoulder. The mother was expected to return to her duties. The hunters prepared for the next journey. The baby, unnamed and unrecorded, became part of the earth, absorbed into a history that rarely remembers the weak. Yet those decisions shaped us. They forced our species to become smarter, faster, more adaptable. Without them, we might not be here at all. In the prehistoric world, survival wasn't about who was loved most. It was about who could carry the tribe one step further into the future. Chapter 3: When Nature Chose for Them, Part 1: The Ruthless Hand of Evolution. Long before humans made choices, nature was already making them. In the prehistoric world, not all deaths were the result of a tribal decision. Many were simply ... inevitable. Before anyone could judge a newborn's potential, nature had already stacked the odds. Genetics, environment, disease, and random chance played the first hand, and often that hand was fatal. Imagine a baby born with a weak heart, or underdeveloped lungs, or missing reflexes like the ability to suckle. In today's world, hospitals would jump in, machines would take over. But 50,000 years ago, there was no help coming. Nature acted swiftly and without mercy. Babies who couldn't latch onto their mother's breast would slowly fade. If a fever struck in the first days, there were no herbs strong enough to bring it down. No water clean enough to prevent infection. Infant mortality wasn't a trend, was the norm. It's estimated that up to 50% of all prehistoric children died before the age of 5, many within their first year, and of those, countless never made it past the first few days. But this wasn't just death. It was evolution at work. The children who survived were, by default, the strongest. They had the best genes, the healthiest birth conditions, the luckiest timing. Those were the children who went on to walk, hunt, reproduce, their DNA. It's the reason we're here today. What seems like cruelty in hindsight was actually nature's way of preparing us, sharpening our instincts, strengthening our biology. The babies who didn't make it weren't forgotten, but they became part of a larger story, one of adaptation, survival, and resilience. To our ancestors. The death of a baby wasn't a moral failing or a judgment call. Sometimes it was simply nature doing what it always does, cutting away the weak, to protect the future of the species. And in a world where every step was a danger and every day was a test, those who lived did so on the back of thousands who didn't. Part 2: Birth defects, illness, and the unseen killers in today's world. A child born with a birth defect might live a full, supported life. But in prehistoric times, a minor flaw could mean immediate death. There was no understanding of genetics, no terms like congenital disorder or infection. All the tribe knew was that something wasn't right, and nature would decide. What came next? Some of the earliest skeletons discovered tell haunting stories. Tiny bones twisted unnaturally, skulls misshapen, rib cages underdeveloped, signs of clubfoot, cleft palates, and spinal deformities appear in remains dating back tens of thousands of years. These children never stood a chance. But here's what makes it even more tragic. The tribe often didn't know why a baby was sick or deformed. Illness was seen as punishment, or a spiritual imbalance, or even a sign of a cursed bloodline. So when nature delivered a child who didn't fit the normal mold, fear and superstition rushed in. And then there were the unseen killers: infections, parasites, and viruses. A baby could be born healthy but contract something from contaminated water, unclean hands, or even a simple scratch. In an age before soap and medicine, the smallest wound could become deadly. Malnutrition, too, played a brutal role. A mother struggling to find enough to eat might not produce enough milk. A baby born during drought or famine had little chance of surviving its first months. And without vitamins, minerals, or proper hydration, their bodies would quickly begin to fail silently and painfully to the tribe. A baby that wasted away wasn't cursed. It was simply claimed by nature. Some tribes may have held small rituals to mark the passing. A quiet burial, a stone placed at the site, a whisper to the spirits. But many times, there was no ceremony, no grave, just silence and the unspoken understanding that nature had spoken, and it never repeated it. Part 3. The legacy of loss in human DNA. Every prehistoric baby, lost to illness, weakness, or deformity, left behind more than silence. They shaped the future of our species. Because, as brutal as it was, nature's method was efficient. Over tens of thousands of years, those who survived childhood carried forward traits that helped them and their descendants withstand the world better. Stronger immune systems, better adaptability to temperature. Even behavioral instincts like clinging to caregivers or crying loudly for food, they weren't just emotional reactions. They were survival strategies encoded by loss. Modern scientists now study this legacy. We see it in our DNA hardened by suffering, refined by natural selection. Traits that seem instinctive today were forged in that ancient fire. Why do newborns respond to touch and voice almost immediately? Because, for prehistoric babies, connection to a caregiver was the difference between life and death. Those who failed to bond often didn't survive long enough to pass on their traits. Even our emotional responses to infant faces, the urge to protect, the reflex to soothe, are biological echoes of prehistoric necessity. They come from a time when one missed signal could mean the end. But that legacy also includes grief. Burials of prehistoric infants have been found adorned with red ochre, animal bones and shells, signs of ritual, of memory, of love. These weren't just discarded lives, they were mourned, quietly, and in the only way early humans knew how, by placing their children into the earth with care, even if they didn't yet have words for sorrow. So while nature made the rules, humans still felt the consequences. And in that intersection, between cold biology and warm emotion, humanity slowly evolved. Not just physically, but emotionally. We became creatures that remembered, that regretted, that yearned for what could have been, and maybe that's the most important legacy of all, that even when nature chose death, the human heart began choosing something more: remembrance. Chapter 4. The Mother's Burden, Part 1. Love in the time of survival. We often picture prehistoric mothers as hardened by survival, stoic, unfeeling, merely part of nature's cold machinery. But that's a myth. Because even in the Stone Age, mothers loved their babies. The bond between mother and child is ancient, older than tools, older than language. It's not just emotional. It's biological. The release of oxytocin during childbirth and breastfeeding created a connection that was as fierce in a cave as it is in a modern hospital. And in a world where everything could be taken, that bond may have been the only thing a mother truly had. So, imagine the weight of that love, and then imagine being told by the tribe, by your own instincts, by nature itself, that you had to let go. Some women may have resisted, pleaded, wept. Others, after seeing their previous children die slowly, might have accepted quicker deaths as a mercy, but no matter the response, one thing is certain: the pain didn't disappear just because the world was cruel. In archaeological digs, we find evidence of this: pain burials where mothers and infants are laid together. Sometimes, a baby is found nestled in the crook of a woman's arm, as if placed there in a final, desperate act of protection. Other times, tiny grave goods beads, shells, smoothed stones are buried with infants, perhaps left by the mother, in quiet remembrance that these are not the actions of the indifferent. These are acts of love. And love, in the prehistoric world, was often punished. For some mothers, carrying a child to term meant risking death themselves. A difficult labor could cause permanent injury or kill them outright. Yet they did it, again and again. Why? Because the hope of life, even in the bleakest times, was more powerful than fear. But hope wasn't always enough, and when the tribe turned its back on her child, a mother had to carry both her grief and her silence, not just for the day, for the rest of her life. Part 2. Silent grief. In a wordless world, grief today has a language, words, rituals, support, systems. But in the prehistoric world, grief had no script. There were no lullabies for the lost, no memorials carved in stone. A mother who lost her baby had to mourn in silence, because the tribe had already moved on. She couldn't talk about it, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how. Early humans lacked the vocabulary for emotions as complex as sorrow, regret, or longing. There were no phrases like "I miss them" or "I wish things had been different." There were only actions, glances, quiet moments away from the fire, and yet the grief was there. Anthropologists studying skeletal remains have noted signs of stress in female bones-worn hips from repeated childbirth, malnourishment from giving her food to others, spinal damage from carrying loads for too long. These are physical scars, but they may also reflect deeper emotional ones. The pain of carrying life, losing it, and carrying on anyway. And it wasn't always a one-time loss. Many prehistoric mothers likely lost multiple children. Some may have never raised a baby past its first year. But still, they tried again. Not because they were numb, but because hope and sorrow lived side by side. Even when she said nothing, the tribe likely noticed. Maybe they gave her space. Maybe another woman sat beside her, silently, in solidarity. These were the earliest forms of empathy, instinctual, human. And occasionally, there was resistance. A mother might flee with her newborn into the woods, trying to escape the tribe's decision. Some stories passed down in myths and oral traditions speak of women who defied their people to protect a child marked for death. Most of them didn't succeed, but some did. And those rare acts of rebellion, acts driven not by logic, but by love, are part of the reason we know compassion existed, even when the world said it couldn't. Part 3. Carrying loss into the future. Long after the baby was gone, the mother still carried it, not in her arms, but in her body, her memories, and her silence. In a world with no keepsakes, no photographs, and no graves with names, the only place a child could truly live on was inside the mother who birthed it. Even when she bore other children, the absence of the lost one would echo. Every fire she lit, every animal she skinned, every mile she walked with a child on her hip, there was another one who should have been there, but wasn't. Some archaeologists have unearthed peculiar findings. Women buried with a small item in their hand, perhaps a stone carved in the shape of a baby, or a bundle of fur wrapped tightly, almost like a doll. Could these have been symbols? of grief, representations of children lost too early to remember. We can't know for sure, but in a world where everything had to have purpose, holding on to an object with no survival value suggests something deeper. Memory. And memory is powerful. Even if no one spoke the child's name because maybe they hadn't even named, if the mother remembered the sound it made before falling silent, the feeling of its weight for those first few hours, the ache that lingered in her chest, not from hunger, but from absence. Over time, mothers likely passed these memories into behaviors: a tighter grip on the next child, a sharper sense of danger, a softer hum when rocking a baby to sleep. These weren't just instincts, they were lessons shaped by loss. And through that pain, mothers helped shape the future of humanity, not by saving every life, but by remembering the ones they couldn't. Because, even if no one else mourned, she did undart, and that love, the kind that endures past death, past explanation, past survival, is what made her more than a survivor. It made her human. Chapter 5: Belief, Spirits, and Omens, Part 1. When death was a sacred decision to us, abandoning a baby feels like the ultimate betrayal of innocence. But to many prehistoric tribes, it wasn't just a choice. It was a ritual, a spiritual decision made to protect the tribe, and even the child itself, from unseen forces. You see, early humans didn't separate the physical from the spiritual the way we do today. A baby wasn't just a body, it was a vessel, a potential carrier of power, of curses, of energy from the other world. If something about a child felt wrong, a strange birthmark, a quiet nature, a twisted limb, the tribe might see it not as weakness, but as a sign. Signs came from everywhere: the direction of the wind, the behavior of animals, the shape of the clouds at birth, the sudden cry of a bird. These weren't coincidences, they were omens, and prehistoric people lived by them. In this world, a child wasn't judged by biology alone, it was weighed against the will of the spirits. In some cultures, there was a belief that not every soul wanted to stay. A baby, born silent or still, was thought to be a spirit that chose to come and go briefly, touching the world before returning to the beyond. Letting that baby go wasn't an act of cruelty. It was honoring its choice. Other tribes believed that an unlucky baby could bring disaster, bad hunts, disease, even death to others in the group. In those cases, the tribe acted not out of hatred for the child, but fear of what might come. Ending a newborn's life was framed not as killing, but as cleansing. These spiritual frameworks helped the tribe deal with impossible emotions. If a baby had to die, it was better to believe it was guided by the gods, or protected by ancestors, than to think it was simply unfair. Because, in a world without medicine, without answers, and often without hope, belief gave them something to hold on to, even if it meant letting go. Part 2. Among many early human societies, the birth of a child wasn't just a biological event, it was a spiritual moment loaded with meaning. And when that meaning turned dark, the consequences could be devastating. Some tribes believed in the idea of cursed bloodlines, families believed abnormality, even something as simple as being born breech. It could be taken as proof that the child was touched by darkness. And if that belief took root, that baby wouldn't be raised. But here's the haunting part: sometimes this wasn't seen as punishment, it was seen as sacrifice. The child wasn't just abandoned, it was given back to the gods, the spirits, the earth, a kind of offering to restore balance. In some cultures, the location of the birth mattered deeply. If a child was born during a storm, or under a full moon, or while a fire burned out too quickly, that alone could mark it as spiritually dangerous. Even the direction in which the child first faced upon opening its eyes could matter. These details may sound strange today, but to early humans, who saw meaning in everything, they were vital clues about a child's destiny, or doom. And so, the tribe might prepare a special ritual. Quiet, solemn, not always violent. Sometimes it was a walk deep into the forest. Sometimes a burial under a sacred tree. Sometimes the baby was simply left near water, where it was believed the spirits would take it home. To the modern eye, this looks like tragedy. But to them, it was a sacred duty. Parents believed they were protecting the tribe, their ancestors, and perhaps even the soul of the child itself. Because in that world, death wasn't always an end. Sometimes, it was seen as a kind of rescue. Part 3. Ghosts that never left even when a baby was abandoned for spiritual reasons. Its presence never truly vanished. In many ancient belief systems, especially those rooted in animism, the soul of a child continued to exist, lingering in the wind, whispering through the trees, or watching from beyond the firelight. For some tribes, these baby spirits were not angry, but sad, mournful. They had come into the world too soon, or under the wrong stars, and they hovered between life and death, caught in the in-between. People believed they needed rituals, not just to say goodbye, but to release them from suffering. That's why archaeologists have uncovered infant burials with surprising tenderness. Red ochre painted across the bones, a color symbolizing blood, rebirth, and the spirit world. Tiny beads, animal teeth, or feathers placed beside the body, offerings to guide the spirit. Even cave wall etchings with small handprints that may have belonged to babies who lived, and those who didn't. These aren't signs of ignorance. They're signs of deep, sacred sorrow. In some cultures, the ghost of an abandoned child might return to haunt the mother, not with malice, but with a quiet longing. Dreams of crying babies, sudden chills at night, or the sound of a child's breath in the dark were interpreted as messages from the spirit world. The solution wasn't fear, it was ritual. A symbolic feeding, a chant, a whispered apology. A way to make peace. The belief that death wasn't the end gave parents a fragile comfort. Even if they had to let their baby go to protect the tribe, to obey the spirits, they hadn't lost them forever. The soul could return in another birth, stronger, more ready. It was a cycle, not a punishment. So, while many babies were denied life in this world, they were not forgotten in the next. In the prehistoric mind, that was the ultimate mercy, to release the body, but protect the soul. Chapter 6. The Gender Factor, Part 1. When being born a girl was a death sentence in the modern world. We like to think every child is born equal, but in prehistory, that wasn't always the case. Sometimes, the decision to abandon a baby came down to one brutal question. Was it a girl or a boy? Gender preference wasn't a cultural invention. It has roots deep in our evolutionary history. In harsh environments where survival depended on physical strength and hunting ability, male children were often seen as more valuable. They could grow into hunters, protectors, providers. Their presence meant more meat, stronger defense, better odds for the entire group. Girls, on the other hand, were often viewed as future caretakers. Necessary, yes, but not immediately useful. And in times of crisis during famine, migration, or war, a newborn girl might be seen as an added burden, not a future asset. Evidence of gender-based infanticide appears across multiple ancient cultures, even beyond prehistory. But signs suggest it may have started earlier than we once believed. In some fossil sites, disproportionate numbers of male infant burials have been found compared to females, suggesting that some female babies may never have been buried at all. But this wasn't about hatred. It was cold, cruel math. A tribe struggling to survive might already have enough females to gather, raise children, and maintain shelter. But if they lacked males to hunt or fight, a female birth, especially during a crisis, was seen not as hope, but as a mistake of timing. And so, some baby girls were quietly abandoned, not because they were unwanted, but because they weren't needed yet. To the tribe, this wasn't murder. It was balance. Yet, for the mothers, it may have felt different. Some carried daughters they never got to name. Others bore the pain of watching a second or third girl taken from them, not because she was weak, but because she wasn't a boy. This is a truth we don't like to face. But, in the prehistoric world, your gender could determine your fate, before you even took your first breath. Part 2. The Economics of Survival in Prehistoric Times. Everything was a resource: food, fire, shelter, and yes, people. A newborn wasn't just a bundle of life, it was an investment. The question wasn't just, can we raise this child, but is it worth it? And that brutal equation often came down to economics, tribal economics. Males were typically expected to grow into hunters, warriors, scouts, the ones who ventured out, faced danger, and brought back resources. That meant higher risk, but also higher reward. Raising a boy took energy, but if he survived, he could change the fate of the tribe. Girls, however, were seen differently. Their roles, while essential, were tied more to stability than expansion. Gatherers, caregivers, builders of social bonds. But these roles didn't bring immediate returns, and in times of survival crisis, long-term benefit was often sacrificed for short-term gain. So, if a tribe had too many females and too few males, female infants might be selected out, not because they weren't valued, but because they were viewed as redundant. A devastating word when applied to a newborn life. This wasn't universal. Some cultures may have favored girls, especially when alliances were forged through marriage, or when fertility rates dropped. But, in most evidence found from the Paleolithic and early Neolithic periods, the trend leans toward male preference in harsh conditions, and this left long shadows. It meant some tribes grew up with skewed gender ratios, which later led to competition, social instability, or even the forced taking of women from rival groups. A brutal chain reaction that began with the silent decision to let a baby girl die. But behind every one of those decisions was a parent, often a mother, caught between love and logic. The tribe needed her to make a choice, and she did. Again and again. That legacy didn't end in the cave. It echoes in our myths, our folklore, and even today, in cultures still haunted by the idea that one life is worth more than another, based solely on gender. Part 3. The daughters who changed everything despite the preference for male offspring in many prehistoric tribes. There were times when a baby girl wasn't just spared, she was treasured, and when that happened, the world often changed in unexpected ways. Because daughters, while not always seen as hunters or warriors, were the keepers of culture. They gathered food, learned the medicinal properties of plants, passed on oral traditions, raised the next generation, and often formed the glue that held. In matrilineal societies, which many anthropologists believe existed in certain regions, inheritance, power, and lineage flowed through the mother. In these tribes, daughters were essential, not just helpers, but leaders, wisdom keepers, healers, decision-makers. And every now and then, one of these girls would rise above survival. She'd grow into a woman who became the tribe's midwife, shaman, or spiritual guide, the one others turned to for protection, prophecy, or healing. Her knowledge, shaped by what she had seen and who she had lost, would ripple outward, keeping others alive. So while many daughters were denied life, those who survived often shaped it. Some even changed the fate of their tribe forever. There are traces in ancient burial sites, graves of women buried with ceremonial tools, carvings, or items of spiritual significance. These weren't mere followers. They were leaders, revered, and perhaps they were once the baby girls someone thought about abandoning, but didn't. In those rare decisions to keep her, raise her, believe in her, something shifted. The tribe didn't just gain a child. They gained a future. And that's the deeper tragedy of gender-based infanticide. Not only were lives lost, but so were possibilities. The healer who could have saved the wounded, the teacher who could have passed down stories, the leader who could have ended bloodshed before it began. In the prehistoric world, letting a daughter live was a gamble. But in the long arc of human history, those gambles built civilization. Chapter 7. The Timing of Death, Part 1. Born in the wrong seasoning, prehistoric times. When a baby was born could be as important as whether it was healthy. A strong child born in the wrong season might still be doomed, because when nature turned cruel, timing wasn't just bad luck, it was a death sentence. Take winter, for example. For hunter-gatherers, winter wasn't just cold, it was starvation season. Game was scarce, roots and fruits vanished, and the group had to ration whatever little they had stored. Fires were difficult to keep burning. Water sources froze. Diseases spread faster in the cramped, poorly ventilated shelters. So, when a baby was born midwinter, the tribe faced a brutal equation. Could they keep the child warm enough? Could the mother produce milk when she herself was barely eating? Could they carry an infant during migration, if needed? If the answer to any of those was no, the decision became painfully clear. It wasn't just about the baby's life. It was about everyone else's. On the other hand, spring was a more favorable season. New food appeared. Water flowed. The temperatures rose. Babies born during this time had better odds. Not because they were stronger, but because the world was kinder. The tribe was more open to taking risks. A child born in April had a chance that a December baby never did. And still, sometimes babies arrived early, or late, or during a sudden environmental shift, a surprise storm, a flash freeze, an unexpected animal migration, and everything changed. The tribe's survival strategy was simple: adapt or die. That meant they couldn't afford sentimentality. A poorly timed birth might not be mourned, not out of coldness, but exhaustion. The tribe already knew one misstep, one misjudgment, and more would follow. In the prehistoric world, life wasn't just about being born. It was about being born at the right moment, and for those who weren't, time itself became the deadliest enemy. Part 2. The starvation equation when resources ran low in the prehistoric world. The first question wasn't who was hungry, but who could afford to stay hungry. And newborns, as fragile as they were, often didn't make the cut. Food scarcity wasn't just a seasonal challenge, it was a constant threat. One failed hunt, one drought, one spoiled store of dried meat could throw an entire tribe into chaos. And during those moments, survival became an unforgiving numbers game. Feeding an infant wasn't just about food, it was about energy that the mother had to spend producing milk. But if her own nutrition dropped below a certain level, her body stopped producing. And if there were no wet nurses, no substitute feeding methods, the baby simply faded. Worse still, that infant could place others at risk. A crying newborn could attract predators. A weak baby could slow down a migrating group. A child in constant need could keep a mother from contributing to foraging or fire building. The tribe, operating on the thinnest margins, had to ask, "Can we afford this mouth?" Sometimes the answer was yes. The baby was strong. The group was healthy. They would all tighten their belts and share what they had. But when it was no, that decision was silent. A look passed between elders, a mother given time alone with her baby, a fire that burned quietly until morning. And when the tribe moved on, they did so with one less burden and one more secret buried in the dirt. In some cases, prioritization was brutal. A healthy toddler might be chosen over a sick newborn, a firstborn boy over a third daughter, a mother's survival over her infants. These were not made out of malice. They were acts of strategy, sharpened by millennia of desperation. And while the baby's life might have ended in stillness, the decision itself echoed through the group, unspoken but understood. Because, in a starving world, the question wasn't what was right. It was what could be survived. Part 3. When death was mercy, we often think of death as the ultimate tragedy. But, in the prehistoric world, there were moments when death wasn't seen as failure. It was seen as mercy. Imagine a baby born too early, with no warmth, no strength, and no chance to nurse. The mother, already starving, has no milk, her bones protrude, her eyes hollow. She can barely walk, let alone cradle a child all night. The elders see this, so does she. She doesn't want to let go, but somewhere deep down, she knows. Prolonging this life would be prolonging suffering, so the baby is left in the quietest way, maybe wrapped in animal skin, maybe kissed once on the forehead, maybe held until its breathing stops. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the intention, to spare it the slow agony of dying, later colder, hungrier, more alone. In this sense, prehistoric people weren't always acting out of cruelty or calculation. Sometimes, they were guided by a fierce, aching form of compassion. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have warm beds or incubators. What they had was instinct, and the understanding that not all lives could be saved. Some anthropologists even believe certain death rituals, placing babies in specific positions, surrounding them with symbolic objects, returning them to rivers or caves, were meant not just to honor death, but to ease it. It's a disturbing idea that a mother, out of love, would choose death for her child. But, in a world where survival was unpredictable and pain was guaranteed, that choice, however dark, was often the gentlest one left. This is the part of prehistory we rarely speak of. Not the hunts, not the fires, not the cave paintings, but the quiet, desperate decisions made in the shadows, where love and sorrow lived side by side, and where sometimes letting go was the only way to hold on to humanity. Chapter 8. The Survivors Who Remembered, Part 1. Living with the silence for every child who was lost. There were those who lived, mothers, fathers, siblings, grandparents, and in the quiet after the fire, after the tribe moved on, after the body was returned to the earth. Those people were left with the silence. It's easy to imagine prehistoric survival as cold and practical, but human memory doesn't work that way. We're wired to remember, even when it hurts, even when it's dangerous. And those memories didn't disappear into the dirt. They lived on, hidden in gestures, rituals, even in the way someone built a fire or chose a name. Imagine a mother who once gave up her newborn during a famine. Years later, she has another child. But every time that child cries, she hears a different sound, an echo. Not the voice of the living, but the one she lost. And she says nothing. because the tribe has already moved on. Or imagine a sibling, a young girl, barely old enough to understand, who wakes one morning to find her baby brother gone. No one tells her where, but she remembers the silence. The way her mother didn't speak that day. The way the wind felt different. These are the survivors who carried the weight, not in words, but in wounds that had no name. Over time, those memories likely shaped behavior. A parent might become overprotective. A sibling might learn to harden their heart. Grief didn't disappear, it evolved. It wove itself into customs, into lullabies, into warnings whispered to pregnant women. Don't give birth before the rains. Don't trust a silent baby. These weren't superstitions. They were memories, disguised as wisdom. And so, generation by generation, the stories of those who didn't survive were passed down, not as names or faces, but as instinct, as caution, as invisible scars. Because survival wasn't just about who lived. It was about what they remembered, and who they never forgot. Part 2. Grief etched in stone. Prehistoric people didn't write books. They didn't carve names into headstones. But that doesn't mean they didn't remember. They just remembered differently. Across caves in Europe, Africa, and Asia, archaeologists have discovered symbols etched into stone walls. Some are obvious hunting scenes, animals, figures dancing round fire, but others more abstract. Tiny handprints, repeated marks in red ochre, curled lines, always the same shape, placed beside what appear to be smaller. We may never know for sure, but what we do know is this: people do not create ritual unless they're trying to make sense of something larger than themselves. And loss, especially of a child, is one of the most incomprehensible things any human can face. It's possible that some of these cave paintings weren't about victory or celebration, but about grief. Not every painting is triumphant. Some feel quiet, still, almost sacred, in certain sites. Infant remains have been found buried beneath hearths, or within the walls of shelters. Not discarded, but placed with care. Perhaps the family wanted to keep the child close, even in death. Maybe they couldn't say goodbye, so they brought them home. And then there's the red ochre, used again and again in prehistoric burial rituals. Red ochre wasn't just decoration, it was symbolic: blood, life, rebirth. Covering the body in ochre may have been an early way to express mourning, or even hope that the child would return in another life, stronger and more ready. These rituals weren't extravagant. They were intimate acts of remembrance. Proof that early humans didn't just survive, they felt, they grieved. They found ways to etch their sorrow into the only medium they had: earth and stone. We often assume our ancestors were hardened by their world, but the evidence suggests otherwise. They were shaped by pain, yes, but also by memory. And in those memories, scratched into cave walls or buried beneath fire pits, the babies they lost were never truly gone. Part 3. Teaching through loss. When you lose someone, especially a child, your world doesn't just break, it changes shape. And in prehistoric times, that transformation didn't stop at the individual. It reshaped the entire tribe. Because every loss became a lesson, every death a warning, every moment of silence a message for the future. Survivors didn't just carry grief, they carried knowledge. A mother who had lost 2 infants to cold might become the tribe's quiet expert on warmth and shelter. An elder who'd watched a baby fade from starvation might be the one urging better food storage, or leading the group to migrate earlier. This is how prehistoric wisdom was born. Not from books, but from pain. And so, loss became a teacher, A brutal one, but an effective one. Children who grew up hearing the hushed stories of the sister who didn't survive the winter, or the brother who was given back to the spirits, internalized these truths, not as tales of horror, but as blueprints for caution. They learned how fragile life was. They learned that birth didn't guarantee survival. They learned to help their mothers, to respect the signs, to prepare earlier and move quicker on this way. Grief became survival because, for all the lives that were lost, some were saved because of those very losses. A better fire, a cleaner stream, a faster decision when a newborn coughed at night. Even in the absence of language, prehistoric people found a way to say, "This happened. Don't let it happen again." Their rituals, their warnings, their customs, these weren't superstitions. They were love, carried forward through generations. And that love, shaped by sorrow, became the foundation of human resilience. So when we look back at our ancient ancestors, let's not just see hunters and gatherers. Let's see the ones who remembered, who adapted, who quietly passed down grief as wisdom. Because in a world where so many babies were left to die, the ones who lived owed everything to those who didn't. Chapter 9. The Fire They Left Behind, Part 1. Echoes in the flame when night fell in the prehistoric world. The fire wasn't just for warmth. It was memory. It was meaning. It was where the tribe gathered, and where the dead were remembered, even if no one dared speak their names. The flickering flames lit more than just faces, they lit stories, passed in glances, gestures, and fragments of spoken myth. And among those stories, whether told directly or left unspoken, were the babies who didn't survive. Not everyone talked about them, but the fire. The fire always knew. Some tribes may have believed the flames carried spirits skyward smoke, lifting their essence into the night. Others may have whispered that the warmth of the fire was a gift from those who had passed, reminding the living that they were never truly alone. Even today, in remote communities where oral traditions persist, fire remains a sacred place for reflection. A space to process what has no name, grief without language. So imagine a mother sitting near the embers, her face half lit, her eyes hollow, her arms empty. She's made her choice, or the tribe made it for her. Her child is gone, but she watches the flames because she needs somewhere to put the ache. There is no grave, no ceremony, just fire, burning, crackling, remembering. Maybe she drops a feather into it. Maybe she murmurs a sound she never repeat. Maybe she says nothing, because nothing is left to say. But the moment still matters, because in that silence a ritual is born. Not for the child, for the grief. The fire didn't erase what happened, but it gave survivors a place to release what couldn't be held any longer. The weight, the guilt, the ache that sits behind the ribs and never leaves. Even if the baby was left on a rock, or in a cave, or by a river, they were still mourned by flame. And the flame, it told the next generation, this mattered, even if we never speak of it again. Part 2. Smoke without names. In prehistoric life, names were rare. Sometimes, they weren't even used until a child had survived the first few months. Why? Because naming something meant claiming it, attaching hope to it, believing it would live. And when so many babies didn't, many were never named at all. They lived their brief moments unnamed and unseen by history, but around the fire, they weren't entirely forgotten. Elders might tell vague stories. There was once a little one who didn't open her eyes, or a boy born before the snow. He didn't stay long. No name, no face, just a shadow in a tale, but a shadow carried forward. And this wasn't cruelty. It was survival. Giving something a name gave it weight, emotional, spiritual, communal. It meant acknowledging it as fully human. And when loss was common, detachment became a form of protection. But that didn't make it painless. Even unnamed, these lost babies left marks in the fire rituals, in sudden silences when someone asked about the past, in a glance exchanged between parents when another child was born too soon. That silence, that flicker in the eyes, that was remembrance. Anthropologists studying early burial sites have found that not all bodies were interred the same. Some infants were buried, curled in animal skins, perhaps the only protection they ever knew. Others were surrounded by burnt charcoal, suggesting they were laid near or in fire before burial. Was this cremation, a cleansing, a release? We may never know. But the symbolism is powerful. Fire consumes, but it also purifies. And in a world where loss couldn't be prevented, perhaps fire was the only way to make peace with it. These children may not have had names, but their absence shaped the people left behind. Their brief lives became lessons, memories, rituals, and the fire ensured they would never fully fade, because even smoke, rising, vanishing, nameless leaves behind a scent. Part 3. The warmth that remained. The fire didn't just burn for the living. It burned for the ones who weren't there, the ones who should have been curled in someone's arms, whose names were never spoken, whose futures were never written, and yet, somehow, they remained. Because even in a world where survival was everything, humans never fully let go of the past. They remembered, not always with words, but with actions. The way someone touched a carved stone, the way a mother stared into the embers longer than necessary, the way an old man told a story, then paused, his voice catching, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. That's what grief looked like in the Stone Age. Not tears, not screams, but a longer silence, a gentler fire. Some archaeologists have discovered unusual fire pits at ancient sites surrounded by bones, beads, or scorched earth shaped into rings. They believe these may have been mourning circles, where the tribe came together not to hunt, not to eat, but to remember, to sit in stillness, to honor what was lost. Even the simple act of passing around warmth, sharing fire, was sacred. In many early cultures, fire itself was life, and passing it to someone else was seen as a form of protection, even love. A way of saying, I want you to survive, even if others didn't. So, when we ask, did they care? Did it matter to them when babies? In how they kept it alive, in how they gathered around it, in how they shared it, again and again. Despite knowing how often life could vanish, that fire, flickering against cave walls, was more than heat. It was memory. It was mourning. It was a soft, wordless promise. We will go on, but we will not forget. Chapter 10. What we carry today. Part 1. Echoes in our DNA. Why? Oh, you may not know their names. You may never hear their stories told in full. But deep within you, you carry them. The babies left to die. The mothers who let them go. The fathers who watched silently. The siblings who grew up haunted. They're still with us. In our biology. In our fears. In our need to protect the ones we love. Modern science tells us something extraordinary. Trauma can leave marks on DNA. It's called epigenetics, the way life experiences can flip genetic switches, passed from one generation to the next. And when it comes to abandonment, grief, and survival, those experiences shaped us. That sense of urgency when a baby cries, the panic that grips your chest when a child is missing for even a second, the deep-rooted instinct to sacrifice everything for your child, even when it makes no logical sense. Those are not just emotions. their echoes ancient, inherited, unforgettable. You come from a line of survivors who made impossible decisions. Some chose to abandon, others chose to fight, and some had no choice at all. But their choices carved a path that led directly to you. And now, in a world where infant mortality has dropped dramatically, where most children are born into safety, that inherited fear doesn't vanish, it just changes form. We worry obsessively. We overprotect. We mourn tragedies halfway across the world as if they were our own, because our wiring still believes life is fragile. And not everyone makes it. It's a painful legacy, but also a sacred one. Because, in remembering those forgotten infants, in honoring the mothers who suffered in silence, we reconnect with the rawest, truest part of ourselves, the part that aches, the part that hopes, the part that survives, not just for ourselves, but for those who never had the chance. Chapter 10. What we carry today. Part 2. The myths that remain even today. Across every culture, in every corner of the world, stories remain, fragments of something ancient, echoes of what we used to endure. You see it in fairy tales, babies taken by spirits, switched in the night, left in forests. You see it in religious texts, the child sacrificed, the infant spared by divine intervention, the miracle birth during famine or war. You see it in lullabies, songs with haunting melodies, whispered warnings, promises of protection that sound more like pleas than comfort. These myths didn't appear from nowhere. They were born in firelight, carried on the breath of mothers who had lost too much to say it plainly. They are the coded grief of generations, hidden in stories so that children could sleep and adults could remember. Some cultures speak of spirit children, babies who choose to return to the womb again and again, only to leave shortly after birth, never staying long. Others tell of ancient deities who test a mother's resolve by taking her child, watching how she grieves, then granting her future blessings. Whether or not these myths are literal doesn't matter. What matters is why they exist. Because, for millennia, humans have needed ways to explain the inexplicable, to give purpose to pain that had no reason. And in doing so, we created stories not just to escape grief, but to carry it. Even now, in the age of hospitals and heart monitors, these stories persist. When we lose a child, we say things like, "They're in a better place. They were too pure for this world. It wasn't their time." We may not believe in caves or omens anymore, but we still reach for language that wraps tragedy in meaning. Because deep down, we are still those same people. Still trying to make sense of the silence. Still standing by the fire, watching the smoke rise. Chapter 10. What we carry today. 3. A future built on grief. We often celebrate the survivors. The ones who overcame, who endured, who lived to pass on their stories. But the truth is, our survival was built just as much on those who didn't. The babies who were left behind, the mothers who grieved in silence, the choices no one wanted to make, they shaped us. Not just biologically, but emotionally, spiritually, generationally. Their absence created urgency. Their loss gave rise to ritual. Their silence gave birth to culture. We learned to prepare better, to protect more fiercely, to create tools, shelters, medicine, and eventually systems of care, not just because we were smart, but because we were desperate not to repeat the pain. Today, when a baby is born in a warm hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines, soft blankets, and skilled hands, that moment is not just modern science. It is ancient grief transformed. It is thousands of years of loss and love turned into action, into policy, into protection. And while we may never know the names or faces of those prehistoric children, We honor them every time we choose to protect the vulnerable. Every time we fight for a child's safety. Every time we say, no more forgotten ones. Their stories were written in ash, in bone, in silence, but now, you know. You carry them to Dot, not as a burden, but as a reminder that from the darkest parts of human history, we carved a path toward something better, not perfect, not painless, but possible, and maybe, just maybe, every time we light a candle, hold a newborn, or whisper a lullaby in the dark, we keep that fire alive. The same fire that burned in caves. The same fire that remembered the ones we lost. The same fire that said, even in death, you mattered. They were small, silent, sometimes nameless, but they changed everything. The prehistoric babies left to die didn't vanish without meaning. They shaped the way we remember, the way we mourn, and the way we love. Their stories carved in stone, whispered in firelight, buried in ochre, not just history, they are legacy. We are here because someone made an impossible choice, and someone else carried the grief. Today, we hold our children tighter. We build warmer homes. We sing softer lullabies, not because we've forgotten the past, but because, in some deep way, we still carry it. So the next time you see a newborn sleeping peacefully, think of the thousands who never got that chance. And honor them not with sorrow alone, but with the promise to protect what they could not keep. They mattered. They still do. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else hear the echoes. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel for more emotional, eye-opening journeys into the forgotten truths of our human past. Let's keep these stories alive together, because memory is